Okay, so today is a really important day in class. This may in fact be one of the most important lessons that you will take away from art this semester. And that's because this is all about practical life application. And what we're going to be learning is how to read a ruler. Now, I know that learning how to read a ruler is something that everybody learns way back in the day in elementary school. But I've noticed that for high schoolers, that lesson did not always stick. And so sometimes people get really confused in class when I ask them to make very specific measurements. And that's a really pretty common thing. So if you think you know how to read a ruler already, excellent. But if you're a little fuzzy and things are maybe a little vague and you're not quite sure you remember exactly, today's lesson is going to help you refresh on how to do that. In my class, learning how to draw and measure things with a ruler accurately is super important because we're going to be learning things like how to draw with a grid and how to make things like value scales and all sorts of things throughout the whole semester. But in real life, this has a ton of important practical life applications as well. One day when you own your own home, you may want to measure a room to have new carpet installed, or you may want to install new kitchen cabinets. You maybe want to measure out how you want to lay out the plants and flowers in your front yard. There's lots of important reasons why using a ruler or a tape measure or a yardstick is a very important thing to know. It definitely comes in handy. So in your packet of things, you should have gotten a long strip of paper like this. Now, if you did not get that, you can simply take a piece of paper and cut it to where it's a long strip like this. I'm just using a scrap piece of drawing paper. So we're going to use this piece of paper to represent 1 inch of length on a ruler. So if this is 1 whole inch, we're going to think of this as a unit of 1. The first thing we're going to do is take that piece of paper and I want you to fold it in half and crease it right down the middle. So now when we open that back up, we now end up with 2 parts. We have this part and this part. We have 2 even halves of our inch. And so what you're going to do, you can do this in pencil, but we are going to draw a nice long line down that seam and label it 1/2 because that represents half of an inch. Now we're going to take that and fold it back again, fold it back in half. We're going to fold it in half a second time, breaking it into smaller sections. Once you've folded it, open it back up, and now you can measure that we have 4 parts of this whole inch now. So those 4 parts are now called fourths. So we are going to, starting from the left side, because you always read a ruler from left to right, the same way you do words. Starting on the first fold line, I'm going to draw a little bit of a shorter line, shorter than my 1/2 inch, and label this 1/4. And then my 1/2 inch is the second line, so that technically means it is 2/4. So here we have 1/4 and 2/4. But with 2/4, you always want to reduce that or simplify it down to the smallest number. So 2/4 simplifies to 1/2. And then we're going to take and measure our next one, and that would be 3/4. So I'm going to draw a line and label this 3/4. And so now we can count out really easily 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. And then 4/4 would be the full inch. 4/4 would simplify to 1 whole inch. You'll oftentimes hear that referred to as quarters because you have 4 parts, the same way you have 4 quarters in a dollar. We're going to fold it all back up and fold it in half again. Crease that and open it again. Now, if you count the sections, we now have 8 sections. So we're going to call these our eighths. For the first section, I'm going to draw a line a little bit shorter than my fourths, my quarters, and label this first one 1/8. The second one is my 1/4 line, which would be 2/8, but it simplifies to 1/4. The third one, I'll draw another shorter line and label this 3/8. My half line would be 4/8, but it simplifies always to 1/2. The fifth one will be 5/8. The sixth one simplifies to 3/4. That would be 6/8. And then this last one would be 7/8. So we now have our 8 parts and we can count out those 8s. Now every single line that we see so far is one of those 8s. Even if it's in blue, it just simply also represents another bigger section of the ruler. So I can count out 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8 is the full whole inch. So now we're going to break this down one more time. I'm going to fold it back up and fold it in half one more time. Now when I open this back up, it's divided each one of those sections in half. So I now have 16 sections. So these are called our 16ths of an inch. And I'm going to crease those just a little bit more. So now the 16ths of an inch works the exact same way. So we're going to go through and label those as well, this time using the shortest little line to indicate it. And each time the lines get shorter because they're representing smaller and smaller sections of a whole inch. So my first crease line would be 1/16, 2/16, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then of course 16/16 would be the end of that whole inch section. So I hope that that gives you a little review of all of those parts and what they represent. Now let's take a look at how to measure things with a ruler where you're looking at a whole ruler. Now that you have your measurements finished, we are going to glue that into our sketchbook page. So just with your Elmer's glue, you could use a glue stick as well. Add some drops of glue. Remember, not too much. And then in your sketchbook, since it's 9 by 12, you may have to turn it at a slight angle to get it to fit on the page, but I'm working in a really extra large sketchbook, so I can glue it straight across. Glue that down into your sketchbook, and you may have to give it some pressure to let it dry. And then you can label the top of the page, if you would, your ruler notes. And put your name and class code in the top corner. Then you will photograph this page and submit this for part of your assignment today. So in one of my large sketchbooks, I've sketched out a larger scale version. So if I ask you to find the 2-inch marker on the ruler, you would start at your 0 and you would count forward 1 whole inch and 2 whole inches. So that would be my 2-inch line there. And if I were drawing this, I would lay my ruler down and I would put a little vertical tick mark at my beginning point, count it out, and then put a little vertical tick mark at my ending point. One important thing to note is that the two little lines here, that does represent inches as an abbreviation. If you just see one line like that, that means feet. So let's look at 1.5. Now to measure out 1.5, again, you start at your 0 and you jump to 1 full inch, and then you're gonna add a half to that. So now I'm gonna jump to my middle to here. So that measurement would be 1.5. If I ask you to find a measurement that's 3 3/4, you always start with the whole inches first. So I'm gonna start at my 0 and say there's 1, 2, 3, and then I'm gonna count my fourths or my quarters. So there is 1, 2, 3, and that right there would be 3/4. Notice I also counted my half line as 2/4, so I went 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. Don't forget that those lines can also count as other things. Next, let's look at 1 7/8. So again, at the 0, count 1. So I'm going to count every eighth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1 7/8 would be right there. Another way you can think about it too is I know 7/8. 7 is just 1 less of 8. So I could, to speed it up, jump to my 2 and then back up 1/8. That's a shortcut that you can take if that makes sense to you. Another trick that I also like to show my students, when you start working with smaller increments and measurements, it is okay if you want to draw out the jumps or the tick marks that you make to get to your total. So let me show you what that would look like. You can make your vertical tick mark on your 0, and then to help you count everything out, you can say 1 is right there, and now I need to count out 7/8. So I'm going to say there's 1/8, 2/8, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And by doing that, that's a good way to help you double check your work. And then you can say there's 1 whole inch, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they should all look like nice even increments. If you see that those sizes are changing, that probably means you're making a mistake somewhere and you need to go back and count. Another important thing that I like to mention with the eighths of inches is just to remember, eighths are every other line. So skip all the short ones, and it's just every other line after that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so on. So every other line. So now let's look at 2 3/16. So for that one, start at your 0, count up 1, 2, and now we need 3/16. So with 16ths, those are going to be every single line. So 1, 2, 3. That would be 2 3/16. So now that we've learned how all the markings and the measurements on a ruler works, I now want you to practice that skill and get better at it, because it just takes time and practice.